need to get secure gun storage in cars laws.
Thank you very much.
All right, next question. Another big concern facing Nashvillians is the skyrocketing cost of living. Too many people who work in the city can no longer afford to live in the city. And while the city's investment in affordable housing has increased in recent years, what specifically would you do differently to try to move the needle? We'll start with Matt Wilshire.
Sure. Thank you, Rory. And as you know, this is what I did for 3 years before I launched my campaign for mayor. After a career that I enjoyed very much in the private sector and then working in the mayor's office for 8 years, in 2019, I moved to MDHA to work on one of the biggest challenges that was facing our city, the skyrocketing cost of living. It's going to take a broad-based approach. And at that time, we launched a plan to invest in the Envision program at MDHA that Phil Ryan helped start, who's here today, to transform areas of concentrated poverty into thriving mixed-income, mixed-use neighborhoods by adding additional low-income housing, workforce housing, and market-rate housing together at one location to improve the quality of life, to keep jobs, to keep housing near where the jobs are, and make it a safer and more successful community. We also need to work with the private sector. And in my 3 years at MDHA, through public-private partnerships, we helped develop over 4,000 units of affordable housing. We're going to need to increase that amount, again, by working with the private sector. The government can't do all of this, but we can work to make it easier for folks to build additional housing units along transit corridors, tying back to your question about transit, about how we can move around this city more easily while increasing the amount of housing that's available for folks. So it's going to take a multifaceted approach, working with the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector so that we have the supply of housing to meet the demand for folks wanting to live here.
Sharon Hurt.
So I really appreciate and know that we have a housing crisis, not just in Nashville, but we have a housing crisis all over this country. So my approach is more about addressing the people. I'm about people, preservation, and prosperity. And I believe what we're going to have to do is create better jobs, better pay, to make sure that people are able to pay wherever they live. They will be able to afford. I think that there is an economic tsunami that is about to come. I want everybody who can to start their own businesses because I believe contracts, and more contracts are going to come with the new stadium as well as the East Bank redevelopment and all of the other developments that we see are coming across this country. We've got to prepare to make sure that every person has the opportunity to have economic equity and empowerment. And I believe that's where we need to go because the affordability of Nashville is not going to go down. So what we need to do is work to make sure that every person, not one person, is left behind, but they are put in positions to have gainful employment, as I did with workforce development when we had over 500 people hired for the Music City Center, as well as 2,000 that were trained, referred for training, and over 500 with OSHA training.
Thank you. Jeff Yarborough.
One of my first priorities upon being elected to the state Senate was housing. I literally wrote the law that put affordable housing into Tennessee law and created tools for Metro to use to build that housing. But the reality is we are not using those tools enough, and we are barely nibbling around the edges of a problem that's getting worse and worse and worse. Currently, our effective affordable housing strategy is keep driving until you can afford something, which is a terrible affordable housing strategy and a bad transportation strategy to boot. We have to do a lot better. We got to do a couple things. One, we got to do a much better job of preserving affordability where it is. It does people very little good if you're getting priced out of your own neighborhood and you're told that there's housing 15 miles away. We need to use property tax freezes and do better partnerships to rehabilitate homes to keep people in the neighborhoods that they help build. Two, we have to do a much better job of bringing the private sector off the sidelines and into this game. If you wait on just the government to build housing to solve this problem, we will solve it in the mid-2100s. We have to make it easier, quicker, and faster for companies to be part of housing. Third, we have to do down payment assistance programs to help our teachers, firefighters, and cops who make this city work be able to afford to live in the city they serve.
Thank you. Heidi Campbell.
There is a tipping point at which this is not advantageous for anybody. And I was talking to a hotel owner the other day who was telling me that business is great, but he can't afford to keep his rooms clean because the staff that would clean the rooms can't afford to live here. People are getting priced out of Nashville, and this is an all-hands-on-deck emergency. We have to do something about this, and one single thing alone is not going to solve it. We're going to have a multifaceted approach to solving this problem. We need to do a survey of our public land. We have a lot of public land in our city that could be employed for affordable housing. Though the state precludes us from entering into agreements based upon affordable housing requirements, we can certainly encourage companies that are moving here to invest in public land for affordable housing. You know, they also need to have employees that can afford to live in this city. And then we need to continue to invest in and support artist co-ops and tech co-ops. I was in the music business for many years, and it's very sad for me to see a lot of my friends in the music business getting priced out of Nashville. And then we also need to look at possibly using school land for housing for teachers, RTI instructors, counselors, staff, so that we can make some of our most important employees make life easier for them and make it more affordable in our city for them.
Thank you. Jim Gingrich.
So I do at times in these conversations feel like I've been transported back in time, because if you watch the 2015 mayoral debate, they were talking about the same thing. And here we are today, and the only thing that's changed is we've done multiple studies. Each one says it's worse than the last time we've done a study, but the situation is now a crisis. Because as you said, the people who serve the city, police officers, teachers, other metro workers, can't afford to live in the city they serve. And the issue is now such that we need tens of thousands of units of affordable housing. That is a multi-billion-dollar challenge for us in Nashville. There are three things that we should focus on. Obviously, we should continue to properly fund the Barnes Fund, but that by itself is not going to be sufficient. The nonprofit sector cannot solve this on their own. We do need to think creatively about how do we think about the land the city holds and owns in a more strategic way to help facilitate this. But the real key is how do we get our private sector both to preserve and to build new housing. Nashville shouldn't be among the most difficult cities in the United States to construct affordable housing, and if you talk to anybody who does it, that's what they're going to tell you. It shouldn't be easier to do it in Cookeville than it is in Nashville. And that means that we have to improve the way we interact with them, and we have to create better incentives so that they'll actually put the billions to work that need to get put to work.
Your time. Thank you. Vivian.
When I think of affordable housing, I think of two groups of people. The people who've been here that we need to be protecting, and the people who are coming here that are wanting to live here in Nashville. And I'll say the third, my son, who I have not been able to get him out of my house. So when I think about the people who are here, I think of that gentleman that's sitting in this audience, Reverend Representative Love, who worked very hard to increase the income allowance for seniors to be able to apply for the tax-freeze program. When I first went into the office of the assessor of property, that was one of the first conversations I had with Reverend Representative Love. And he knew that was going to be a very heavy cross to bear, no pun intended. But my point is, he worked with the supermajority to get that income increase raised. Now more people can qualify and stay in their homes. As the assessor of property, I know this county parcel by parcel. And one of the things that I identified is that we have more than 200 vacant properties that's at least 2 acres plus that we can enter into public and private partnerships and begin to use the land that we have. If it's not making money, it's not making sense. And then when we think about the fact we have other vacant properties that's owned by Metro government that's idly just sitting, unused, schools, over in District 1, which is close to Jolton, we must do better to make what we have work for us. And that is what I would do if I was elected mayor.
Freddie O'Connor.
Thanks. So if you months ago, I voted to oppose the stadium deal because it felt like we were making the same type of mistake that has led to exactly this scenario. But what we can do different is take the East Bank Vision Plan, which has ambitious targets for affordable housing, and use our newly reclaimed public land to build housing so affordable that people that are working at the new stadium can afford to live there. That's something different. The other thing that is critically important, that is something different, that factors into every household in Nashville's cost of living, is we can build the transit system that Nashville deserves. And we've already worked to build it into this budget, that we're going to continue to make progress on not just community transit centers and communities that will use transit. And that's the healthcare and hospitality workers that work different shifts, that have to take the bus sometime at midnight or later. In order to avoid parking fees, a huge part of the cost of living on top of owning, maintaining, insuring, and fueling a car. And that's different. We haven't done this as Nashville. We need to invest in that transit system, and we can. We have the operating capacity to do it, and we'll move forward. Now, we can also use the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to use infrastructure investment in affordable housing. So often developers affordable housing developers hit infrastructure costs. And as a mayor, it's time for us to coordinate. Instead of waiting for people to come to us when they discover that they're eligible for a property tax freeze, we can use the data in Metro to go identify every eligible property owner and actively enroll them.
Thank you. Alice Roller.
Yeah. Well, I agree with a lot of the folks on this stage, and I would say in particular Jim Gingrich. He's right. If we keep electing the same people, we won't get a different result. 10 years ago, when I worked for Governor Haslam, we designed an economic development plan, and the region has incredibly prospered. But Davidson County residents, all or nearly all of their economic gains have been erased by our city's tax policy and by our city's planning to take a tax and spend approach to every problem that we have. So the first way to make our housing more affordable is to not raise taxes on our residents and to not continue to push them out and to push rents up when rental property owners are forced to pass those increases on to residents. The second way is to do a lot of things that Senator Yarborough has helped lead at the legislature, which is to get government out of its own way. There are ways to speed along the permitting process, and I appreciate the legislation that he has passed to help with that. The longer it takes to construct new housing, the more expensive that housing is due to the carrying costs. The last thing, I think we've got to get our government into a place of being more customer focused, that we think less about defending each and every department and their turf, and we think more about getting a result for the people who live here. And I'd love the opportunity to do just that.
Thank you.
Let's turn our attention to schools now. As you know, Metro Nashville Public Schools